He was already on one knee. The ring box was open. The diamond caught the candlelight the way only something very expensive can, a slow, theatrical sparkle that made the nearest table go completely still. A couple in their 60s near the window stopped mid-sentence. A waiter froze, bottle suspended at a 45-degree angle. The room held its breath as one organism. And the woman sitting across from him, the woman looking down at the ring, then up at his face, wore an expression that had no name in any language she knew. It wasn't joy, it wasn't surprise, it was something older and more frightening than either. It was the face of a person who has just realized they are looking at a stranger. His name was Daniel Ashford, 34 years old, structural engineer, a man who double-checked every measurement and never left a calculation incomplete. He had planned this night for 6 weeks, the restaurant, the table, the reservation under a name the host had confirmed twice. He had rehearsed the sentence. He knew exactly what he was going to say. He had not checked which table she was sitting at. The woman in front of him was Claire Sutton, 31 years old, freelance illustrator. She had been sitting at this table for 40 minutes, waiting for her best friend, who was 22 minutes late and not responding to texts. She had a sparkling water untouched, a bread basket she hadn't started. She was drawing nothing in particular, just lines, the way you do when the world feels slightly too loud. She had never seen this man before in her life. The woman Daniel had come to propose to, Sophie Crane, 3 years together, the woman whose coffee order he could recite in his sleep, whose laugh arrived 3 beats before everyone else's, was seated on the other side of the restaurant, 15 feet away. A host had misread the reservation 8 minutes ago. She had been sitting there since, assuming Daniel was running late, checking her phone, smoothing the front of her dress once. She saw him go down on one knee. She saw the ring. She saw the other woman. And Sophie Crane, who had been with this man for 3 years, did not move, did not speak, did not breathe loud enough for anyone nearby to notice. She simply sat there and watched the man she loved propose to a stranger, and something in her face went very, very still. The applause began near the window. The couple in their 60s started it, the way people who've been together long enough always do, with unguarded, instinctive joy. It spread fast, tables clapping, someone at the bar letting out a sharp cheer. The waiter finally set down the wine bottle and pressed both hands together. Daniel's eyes were on Claire's face. He had the words ready. He had practiced the sentence until it didn't feel like a sentence anymore. But now, kneeling on this floor in the middle of applause he had not expected to feel this wrong, he could not make his mouth open, because the face in front of him was not the face he had memorized. The eyes were almost right, a grey-green that caught light the same way Sophie's did, but everything else was off. Too still, too careful, too much like a person watching something collapse from a safe distance. He said the name, Sophie. The woman in front of him flinched, not dramatically, not visibly, not to the applauding room, but Daniel saw it. A small interior movement, like a nerve firing somewhere behind her sternum. She looked at him for 1 full second, then she looked down at the ring, then back at him. "I think," she said, keeping her voice low enough that the words barely reached him, "I think you might have the wrong table." The applause was still going. He stayed on one knee for 3 full seconds after she said it, long enough for the couple near the window to begin exchanging uncertain glances, long enough for the waiter to take 2 silent steps backward,
long enough for Daniel Ashford, a man who checked every measurement twice, to understand with cold and total precision what he had done. He stood. He closed the box. The applause stopped unevenly, like a fire running out of things to burn. He turned around. Sophie was already standing. She had her coat. She was holding it in both hands in front of her chest, arms crossed over it, like something she needed to keep between herself and everything in this room.
She looked once at the ring box in his hand, just once, and in that single glance was something so complete, so total in its grief and its acceptance and its absolute refusal to perform, that he felt it like a blow to the sternum. "Take care of yourself," she said, and she left. Not fast, not slow. She walked out of that restaurant with the specific dignity of someone who'd decided, somewhere in the last 60 seconds, that she would not let this place have the worst of her. Her heels were steady on the floor. She did not look back. The door swung shut behind her, and the room breathed again, and Daniel stood in the middle of it, with a closed ring box in his hand and nowhere to go. If you're not subscribed yet, do it right now. Turn on notifications. You are not going to want to miss where this goes. He did not know why his feet carried him back to her table. There was no rational reason. The logical move was to leave, pay the bill, go outside, put one foot in front of the other until the restaurant was far enough behind him that he could start the process of understanding what had just happened. That was what a man with a plan would do. He sat down across from Claire Sutton. She had not left. This was the thing that surprised him most, though he wouldn't understand why until later. She could have left. She should have left. Her evening had been ambushed by a stranger's catastrophe. Her friend still hadn't arrived, and she was now sitting 3 feet from a man who had just publicly imploded. Every reasonable instinct pointed toward the exit, but she was still there. She looked at him, not with pity, something more uncomfortable than pity, something that felt like paying attention. He had the unsettling sensation that she was seeing something he hadn't put on display. He placed the ring box on the table between them. Neither of them looked at it. "She was right," he said. It came out without him deciding to say it. About all of it. Claire said nothing. She wrapped both hands around her water glass. Her knuckles were not white, but close. "You don't have to," she started. I know I don't." A pause. "What color was her dress?" Claire asked. He looked up. "Tonight, what color was Sophie's dress?" He opened his mouth, and nothing came out. He knew what he had imagined. He had pictured this evening so many times that the imagined version had layers, texture, specific detail. Sophie in something dark, something elegant. He had pictured the expression she would wear when he opened the box. But the actual dress she had walked in wearing, the real one, the one she had chosen this morning in her actual apartment, the one that existed in the real world, he had no idea. "You weren't proposing to her," Claire said. Not unkindly, not gently either, directly, with the precision of someone who has thought something clearly and simply saying it. The sentence landed like a structural failure, like a calculation that was wrong from the first line and just took this long to collapse. He stared at the table. He didn't argue. What he wanted in that moment was to say something that would reframe what she'd just said, position it differently, make it less true or at least less central. He was good at that. He had spent 2 years being good at that. But sitting across from a woman who had just survived 30 minutes of his disaster without flinching, he found he didn't have the energy for it. He was too tired. And she was looking at him in a way that made dishonesty feel pointless, not because she'd judge it, but because she'd see it, and he'd know she'd seen it. So he didn't say anything, and somehow that was the right answer. The waiter appeared, asked with truly heroic professionalism whether they would be ordering. They looked at each other.
It was absurd what they were about to do. Both of them understood that. There was nothing logical about two strangers who met through catastrophe deciding to have dinner together in the middle of the wreckage. Nothing rational, nothing safe. "The sea bass," he said. "The mushroom risotto," Claire said, "and more bread." They ate. They talked. Not about what had just happened. That sat between them like an acknowledged fact, present but not requiring narration. They talked about other things, the way cities build outward when they should build upward, why people stop drawing after childhood, as though it were a phase instead of a language. She told him about a mural commission that had been trapped in permit delays for 4 months. He told him about a bridge project, the way it felt physically to stand on something you'd helped make permanent. "Things that last," she said. "Things that hold weight," he said. "It's not the same thing." She looked at him. "No," she agreed, "it's not." There was a pause. She was turning her water glass slowly between her palms, back and forth, a nervous habit she either wasn't aware of or wasn't hiding. He found it not calming exactly, real. He found it real. He was about to say something, and then Claire's phone lit up. She looked at it. Her face changed in a way he hadn't expected, not the small, suppressed flicker from earlier, but something larger, something that moved through her quickly and left visible damage. She pressed the phone face down on the table, picked up her water, put it down without drinking. "Your friend?" She didn't answer immediately. He waited.
"Her boyfriend," she said finally. "He's been—" She stopped, pressed her lips together. She suspected it for months. She asked me to look at something for her weeks ago, and I told her she was probably reading too much into it, and tonight she found out she wasn't. She exhaled. "She needs me to come." The words sat there. He understood immediately what they meant, not just the logistics of it, but the weight of it. The evening that had been building between them, tentatively, dangerously, with all the fragility of something that hasn't been named yet, it was ending, practically, reasonably, the way real life always asserts itself over the almost things. "You should go," he said. "I know." "I mean it. She needs—" "I know you mean it," she said, and looked at him directly. "That's actually the problem." He stared at her. She pushed back from the table, reached for her coat, and then she stopped, set the coat back down, turned and looked at him with the expression of someone who has just made a decision that frightens them and is going to make it anyway. "Can I ask you something?" "Yes," he said. "Do you actually feel anything right now? Not grief or shame or whatever comes with tonight. I mean—" She paused, chose the words carefully. "Is there anything in you that's relieved?" The question landed in a place he hadn't let anyone near in a long time. He should have deflected. He had spent 2 years becoming very good at deflection, at taking a question that pointed at something real and rotating it slightly, answering adjacent to the truth, close enough that no one noticed the distance. He didn't deflect. "Yes," he said. She nodded, like she'd needed to hear it confirmed, not because she doubted it, but because he needed to say it. "Then you already knew," she said quietly. "You just needed tonight to stop pretending you didn't." She picked up her coat again. She picked up her sketchbook. She stood, and they were face to face in the narrow space between the table and the rain-streaked window, and the candlelight was very low now, and she was looking at him in a way that made him feel both completely seen and entirely unready to be seen. Both things simultaneously, no relief valve between them. "If I give you something, you have to promise not to open it here." "What is it?" "Promise." He promised. She opened the sketchbook. She went toward the back, past pages of lines and shapes he could only partially see, each one a world he had no context for. She found a page near the end,
tore it out with the careful deliberateness of someone who knows which pages matter, folded it once, held it out. He took it. Her fingers didn't linger when she let go. She was careful about that. Figure out what you're actually building, and if you decide— She stopped herself. Something moved across her face, something she almost didn't let him see. Just look this time, actually look, before you do anything else. She walked out. Not like Sophie had. Sophie had walked out with closure, clean, decided, final. Claire walked out like someone who might turn around and had decided very deliberately not to. He watched the way she moved, and he knew the difference, and it cost him something he hadn't budgeted for. Like this video right now and subscribe. This is the part that changes everything. He sat alone at the table for longer than he should have. The waiter brought the bill without being asked, set it down with the quiet mercy of a man who had seen every version of a night go wrong. Daniel stared at the folded paper in his hand. He did not open it. He went outside. The rain had been going for a while, steady, indifferent, the kind that asks nothing of you. He walked half a block before he stopped under the awning of a closed bookshop and stood there for a moment with the folded paper in one hand and the ring box in the other, and let himself feel the specific weight of both. He opened the paper. It was a drawing, quick, pencil lines made fast, the kind that happen when observation is moving faster than decision. It was him, kneeling on the restaurant floor, ring box open, face tilted upward to someone who wasn't looking back the way he'd planned. But she hadn't drawn the humiliation. She had drawn the moment just before the mistake resolved into understanding, that suspended instant where a person is completely in the dark, but already, without knowing it, beginning to turn to the light. Something in the angle of his bowed head looked less like a man making a catastrophic error and more like a man right on the edge of becoming someone he hadn't been yet. In the bottom corner, very small, was a phone number. No name, no message, just the number. He stood under that awning for a long time. The rain moved sideways briefly in a gust of wind and soaked the left side of his jacket, and he let it. He thought about what Sophie had said, the line that had arrived like a load-bearing wall suddenly not there. You stopped choosing me a long time ago. He turned that sentence over, looked at it from every angle, because here was the thing about Sophie being right. She wasn't the only one who noticed. He had noticed too. He had been noticing for 2 years and constructing reasons not to name it. Arrangements instead of choices, plans instead of presence, a proposal instead of a conversation. He thought about a woman who watched his worst moment with both hands around a water glass, nervously turning it, and stayed at a table she had every reason to leave. He thought about what it means to actually look. He reached into his pocket. His fingers closed around the ring box. He held it for one moment, not reverently, not with ceremony, just honestly, the way you hold something when you're ready to put it down for the last time. Then he placed it in the inner pocket of his jacket, felt it settle against his chest, and took out his phone. He looked at the number for a long time. He typed, deleted it, typed again, deleted that. The third attempt, he made himself stop editing and just read it. I didn't open it until I was outside. You were right about what I've been building. I don't know if that matters to you, but I thought I should say it to the actual person instead of the version of you I'd started arranging in my head on the walk here. He stared at it. He sent it. 3 blocks away, in the back of a cab, Claire's phone lit up on the seat beside her. She had been looking out the window at the rain-blurred city, at the people moving under umbrellas, at the lit windows of restaurants full of strangers having evenings that were going normally. She had been thinking about Mara, about the particular devastation of being right about something you prayed you were wrong about. She had been thinking about what she was going to say when she got there. She had not been thinking about Daniel Ashford. She read the message once, then again. She sat with it for a moment that was longer than she intended. Outside, the city kept moving, indifferent, enormous. She thought about the way he'd looked at her when she asked if he felt relieved, the half-second before he answered, the thing that lived in that half-second. She thought about leaving the restaurant, the decision it had taken to leave, and the separate, quieter decision that had already been made. She typed, "I have room, but I need you to understand something first." She deleted that. She typed, "Don't arrange this. If you call, call because you want to talk to me, not because tonight left a gap you need to fill." She stared at it, sent it before she could revise it into something safer. Then she pressed her head back against the seat and closed her eyes and exhaled. Daniel read it standing under the awning, rain soaking steadily through his jacket. He read it 3 times, the first time for the words, the second time for what they cost her to write, the third time because he needed to understand exactly what was being asked, not as a condition, but as a standard, the specific and non-negotiable standard of a person who has been half seen before and is not willing to do it again. He stepped out from under the awning, into the rain. He tilted his face up into it for one cold, clarifying second, the water immediate and real and entirely outside of any plan he had ever made. It hit his face and ran down his collar and soaked through, and he didn't move away from it. Then he looked back down on the message, and he typed, "I hear you. I'm going to take some time and close what needs closing before I reach out again, not because the gap needs filling, because I want to earn the right to actually talk to you, and I know the difference now." He sent it. He put his phone away. He stood in the rain on an empty street and let himself not know what happened next, let himself exist for the first time in a long time in the actual present, not the arranged version, not the planned version, not the version he had pre-decided and scheduled and prepared for, the real one, unresolved, unscripted, open. Across town, Sophie Crane sat in her car in a parking garage for 23 minutes before she drove home. She didn't cry, not in the car, not yet. She had been with this man for 3 years, and she knew his face better than she knew most things, and what she had seen in his face tonight, in the split second before the applause started, it was relief, microscopic, involuntary, the expression of someone who has been holding something very heavy and just had it taken away from them. She drove home. She made tea she didn't drink. She sat on the edge of her bed in her coat because she hadn't taken it on yet, and she held her phone, and then she called her older sister and said, "I need to tell you something, and it goes back further than tonight." She talked for a long time, and somewhere in the middle of it, the grief cracked open, the real grief, not for tonight, but for all the quiet evenings she had spent telling herself it was fine, it would come back, people go through phases. She cried for that, for the 2 years of careful hope that had been, it turned out, a long, slow version of standing at the wrong table. Her sister listened, did not interrupt. At the end she said, "You already knew. You've known for a while." Sophie said, "Yes." Her sister said, Then this is the first night you're free." Sophie held the phone and didn't say anything and let that land where it needed to. The ring was returned 2 weeks later. Daniel drove it to Sophie's apartment on a Tuesday morning when he knew she had her design class, left it with her neighbor in a small box with a handwritten note that said, "I'm sorry I made you wait for something I was never fully present for. You deserved honesty earlier. I should have given you that. I didn't. That's mine to carry." She read the note later that evening. She put it in a drawer, not to save it, just because she wasn't ready to throw it away yet. The mural outside the library was finally approved in early spring. Claire began it on a Tuesday when the light came in at the right angle and the permit paperwork was finally, definitively done. It took 6 weeks. She painted it in layers, which was the only way she knew how to work. The background first, establishing the thing that would hold everything else up. Then the details. Then, last, the elements that made it breathe. Daniel called, not texted, called, on a Thursday evening, 8 weeks after the restaurant. She picked up on the third ring. There was a pause. "Hi," he said. "Hi," she said. Another pause, shorter. "I looked," he said, "at all of it, the whole thing. I didn't arrange anything. I just looked." She was quiet for a moment. "I know," she said. "You waited long enough that I believed you. Is that good? That's very good." He exhaled. She exhaled. And something that had been waiting, patiently, without announcement, in the way that real things wait, began. This is not the story of a perfect proposal. It is not the story of a romantic disaster that became romantic comedy. It is the story of a man who confused planning with presence for so long that the universe eventually sat him down in front of someone he couldn't arrange, in a moment he couldn't control, and waited to see what he would do with actual reality. It is the story of a woman who had been half seen before, who knew what that felt like, and who had the specific courage to demand something different, not loudly, not dramatically, but in the quiet, non-negotiable way of someone who knows their own worth. And it is the story of a woman named Sophie Crane who walked out of a restaurant with her coat already in her hands and told the truth to her sister, and woke up the next morning to a life that was terrifying and enormous, and for the first time in 2 years, entirely hers. The ring never came back. What did come back was something smaller and harder to measure. A man who learned finally to look at the actual person in front of him rather than the version he had already decided he was looking at. It sounds simple. It is the hardest thing. Some love stories begin with the perfect moment. This one began the moment everything fell apart, because falling apart, it turned out, was the only way to clear the space for something real to stand. He had walked in with a ring and a plan. He walked out with a direction, and for the first time in years, he followed it.